C.A.F.E.229. Today, we're very honored to have Dr. Semple with us. Dr. Semple is an associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Science. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming to C.A.F.E.229. Today, we're very honored to have Dr. Semple with us. Dr. Semple is an associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at the University of Southern California. She is a licensed psychologist who graduated from Columbia University. She practiced both at New York State and California. We are very honored to have her because she is an expert in mindfulness and youth and children. She is the co-author of the books, Mindfulness-Based Cognitive Therapy for Anxious Children and the Mindfulness Matters program for children and adolescents. We're so happy to have her because mindfulness in children is a difficult topic for many mindfulness experts, actually. Like me personally, is not very good at teaching children and teenagers mindfulness. They are very hard to teach. So we're very happy to have Dr. Semple to present with us. Thank you, Dr. Semple.
Thank you, Peter, for that kind introduction. 130 years ago, the great psychologist William James wrote something that describes very well what my talk is about. He said, "The faculty of voluntarily bringing back a wandering attention over and over again is the very root of judgment, character, and will." After explaining the importance of attention, though, he concluded, "It's easier to define this ideal than to give practical directions for bringing it about." Now take a moment and think back to when you were a child. How many times did some adult tell you to pay attention? Your parents, your teachers, but no one ever actually told you how to pay attention. So the aim of the talk this evening is to offer some practical directions for teaching children how to pay attention. It's always easier to get where we want to go if we have a roadmap. So here's our roadmap for today's journey. I'll start by briefly looking at the differences between Buddhist meditation and the secular mindfulness as we use it in mindfulness-based therapies. Then I'll describe the changes that we've made to adult programs to make the practices more accessible and child-friendly. And I'll describe two mindfulness programs that I've co-developed. The first is Mindfulness-Based Cognitive Therapy for Children, or MBCTC, and the second is the Mindfulness Matters program. And then after a quick wrap-up, we'll have time for some discussion. So starting with the Buddhist meditation versus mindfulness. Buddhist meditation is generally considered to be a method for transforming the mind. In Buddhism, meditation is aimed at developing concentration, clarity, emotional equanimity, and cultivating an understanding of the true nature of reality. In mindfulness-based therapies, our definition is somewhat consistent with this, but it's less expansive and has a slightly different focus. Now, you might be wondering how we made this shift from meditation to mindfulness. Well, back in 1961, the British philosopher Alan Watts said, "If we look deeply into such ways of life as Buddhism, we do not find either philosophy or religion. We find something more nearly resembling psychotherapy." And a number of psychotherapies today have integrated small components of mindfulness into their treatments, but several have the primary goal of training clients to cultivate mindfulness, and these are the ones I'm going to be talking about. In mindfulness-based therapies, we use this definition. Mindfulness means paying attention to things as they are in any given moment, however they are, rather than as we want them to be. Notice that the heart of mindfulness is simply attention. but it's a very specific kind of attention. It's intentional and focused in the here and now. It's unbiased attention to present experience, whether or not we like it. It's non-judgmental, it's non-avoidant, and it promotes acceptance and compassion towards ourselves, towards our experiences, and to others. And we all tell ourselves stories about our own experiences. In our own heads, we analyze and judge them and often rewrite them to change the storyline. And then we buy into our own storylines and believe that they're real. Now, research has actually shown that about half the time our thoughts are not in the same time and space as our bodies. So our mind wanders to the past, it wanders to the future, it wanders to some other space altogether, other than where we're at right here, right now. And that mind wandering can create suffering. So mindfulness-based therapies essentially train clients to keep their mind and body in the same place at the same time. Practicing mindful awareness promotes the development of what we call decentering. This is the ability to step back from our thoughts and see them as being transient events in the mind. Decentering develops with experience by just examining thoughts as just thoughts over and over again. This is the practice of mindfulness. And as we do this, a shift occurs in how we relate to our thoughts. Thoughts become just mind stuff. They're not me, they're not facts, they're not real, they're just thoughts. They're events in the mind. So decentering allows us to step back from our own habituated automatic storylines. And this allows us to attend to our current experiences moment by moment with greater clarity, and then act with more intention, awareness, and compassion. Jon Kabat-Zinn said, "The simple act of recognizing your thoughts as just thoughts can free you from the distorted reality they often create and allow for more clear-sightedness and a greater sense of manageability in your life." So let's take a real quick look at 2 adult mindfulness programs. The first is mindfulness-based stress reduction, or MBSR. This was developed by Jon Kabat-Zinn in the early 1980s. It's a structured 8-week group program that includes 1 2.5-hour class each week, plus 1 all-day class. There are 30 up to 300 participants in a single group with 1 or 2 instructors. It provides guided instructions in 3 core mindfulness practices: mindfulness of the breath, a body scan, which is a non-moving visualization through the body, and then mindful movement practices, which are simple yoga postures. After each practice, the facilitator leads a guided inquiry into the experience of the participants. And there are 3 aims to this. The first is to elicit descriptions of the thoughts, feelings, and body sensations in that experience, and observe how describing them is different than analyzing or judging them. The second is to raise awareness of how much these internal events, the thoughts and feelings, color our experiences, and what might change when the activity is done with mindful awareness. And then the third aim is to discover ways to incorporate these new understandings into everyday life. Now, MBSR demands a big personal commitment, 45 minutes a day of daily home practice for 6 days a week. Who's ready to sign up? But thousands and thousands of MBSR programs around the world today, and its effectiveness is supported by 4 decades of practice and research. Now, the second adult program is Mindfulness-Based Cognitive Therapy, or MBCT. This was developed in the late 1990s as a psychotherapy to prevent depressive relapse. For those who have had 2 or more episodes of major depression, the risk of relapse can be as high as 90%. MBCT is not a treatment for those who are currently experiencing depression, but rather for those who have recovered and want to avoid relapsing. The group format, session times, mindfulness activities, and the home practices are all borrowed from MBSR. But different than MBSR, MBCT is taught by psychotherapists and it's customized for clinical populations. So because of this, the groups tend to be smaller, generally 12 to 15 patients with one therapist. But MBCT also adds interventions that come from cognitive therapy for treating depression. Unlike cognitive therapy, though, MBCT does not attempt to change thoughts, which is a central component of cognitive therapy. But like MBSR, MBCT does teach participants to develop a different relationship with their thoughts. In addition, MBCT teaches ways to manage inevitable low moods by decentering from habituated depressogenic storylines before they spiral down into a full-blown depression. The child programs I'll discuss next are directly based on MBSR and MBCT. But before we transition to talking about these, let's do a short mindfulness activity together. Whenever we start a mindfulness practice, we start by forming the intention as best we can to be fully present in this moment. And we do this by changing our posture, taking an erect, alert posture, settling into our bodies, and if you're comfortable, closing your eyes, or otherwise just taking a soft fuzzy gaze on the table or floor in front of you. And then we frame the beginning and end of each practice with the bells of mindfulness. Start by taking a moment to settle into your body, becoming aware of the stillness inside. And then shift your attention to your breathing at your belly, noticing the rise of the belly on each in-breath and the fall of the belly with each out-breath. Just watching, not controlling or changing. And then we'll start with the 3 mindful breaths, beginning with the in-breath, noticing each part of the in-breath, that space at the top of each in-breath, and then gradually letting the breath out, feeling the body relax, and then taking a moment to rest at the bottom of that in-breath in a space of quiet and stillness. And when your body feels ready, beginning the second in-breath, moving slowly, feeling the changes in your body as you bring the air in, noticing that space again at the top of the in-breath before you start the exhalation. Letting the air out slowly, feeling the body relax more, and then stopping at that point of stillness at the bottom of the out-breath. And then beginning the third in-breath, breathing in slowly, noticing the space at the top of the in-breath, letting the breath go, slowly releasing, relaxing. And then taking a moment to sit at that space of the bottom, peace and stillness and quiet. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes. Let's move on to talking about how we make mindfulness child-friendly. If you've ever tried to make an 8-year-old sit still for 45 minutes, you'll understand why we needed to make changes to the adult programs. The children aren't just little adults, so we needed to make changes in a number of different areas. One area addresses memory and attentional capacity, which are less developed in kids than adults. So we've shortened the activities. Most are 3 to 10 minutes. These are much, much shorter than the 45-minute adult practices. But we engage the kids by repeating short activities with a lot of creative variations. For the MBCTC program in particular, we have both physical and seated activities because the sessions are 90 minutes and it's hard to make kids sit still for that long. And as every teacher knows, kids forget to do their homework. So we provide written session summaries and home practice assignments to help them remember. During the inquiry that follows each practice, we use the same 3 lines of inquiry, but we also use what's called Socratic questioning to explicitly guide children toward a better understanding of the aims of the practice. Some might call it leading the witness, but we provide greater guidance than we typically see in the adult programs. We've also added a lot of activities that focus on cultivating mindfulness in individual sensory modes. So we have mindfulness of seeing, mindfulness of hearing, mindfulness of touching, tasting, smelling. We encourage kids to develop their own creative activities as well. So for example, in one group, a child brought in a handful of autumn leaves, 1 leaf for each participant in the group. And then she guided the group through a mindful exploration of their own leaf, just as she had learned to explore a leaf during one of her own home practices. Now, when working with kids, patience and a flexible sense of humor are useful skills to cultivate. Kids really bring a creativity and a playfulness to their explorations of mindfulness that aren't often seen in adult groups. In my experience, few adults build forts with their meditation cushions or experiment to see how many they can mindfully balance on top of their heads. At least they don't while other adults are watching. Uncertainty creates anxiety, and kids find comfort in knowing the rules of the game. So we provide a few simple written guidelines for mindful behavior. One, for example, is we can choose to speak to each other with kindness and care. We also use very concrete tools to improve emotion self-regulation. For example, we have what's called a worrywarts wastebasket. This is just a small basket along with paper and pencils that are placed just inside the door of the room. When children come in, they're invited to write down what their current worry or fear is on a piece of the paper and then put it in the wastebasket for safekeeping until the end of the session. Doing this supports the development of decentering from thoughts in a very non-abstract, concrete way. Simply by letting go of the worries, they can become not me. They're not real. They're just thoughts. And it can provide a small catharsis, as some kids like to crumple up their worries and get rid of them by scoring a basket. One significant change we made is that therapists and the teachers are more active participants. They're learning and sharing right along with the children. It's really an opportunity to let their inner child out to play and have some fun because they get to take part in all of the same activities. Like the adult programs, we have breath and body practices, but they're shortened quite a bit, and we've added all these hands-on and interactive activities. For example, kids draw pictures or create music or practice mindful eating or touching different objects with mindfulness, and they read poems and stories. We have 3 core themes that are repeated across a variety of activities. The first is to identify thoughts, feelings, and body sensations. helping the kids understand how these are different internal experiences. And identifying these brings greater awareness to how often our thoughts and feelings influence our felt experiences and how subjective they are. We also clarify the distinction between judging and describing our experiences and learn to note what might change when we let go of the judging and simply describe. And then as we practice keeping our attention focused in the here and now, we begin to see more clearly what response choices might be available in this moment. And we call these choice points. Kids are embedded in their families, so we facilitate parental participation, mainly in the MBCT-C program. We include 2 parent sessions, one at the beginning and one at the end of the kids program. In the first session, we explore the aims and methods of the program, practice a few of the mindfulness activities, and encourage the parents to practice mindfulness at home with their child. The written session summaries and home practice activities the kids bring home each week inform parents of the content and aims and practice activities learned in each session. We encourage ongoing dialogue with the parents throughout the program by asking questions or also giving us feedback on how the program is going. And then in the closing session, we discuss how the program went and explore ways that they might help their child and themselves continue a regular mindfulness practice. So now I'll describe some of the specifics of the 2 child programs. Mindfulness-based cognitive therapy for children, or MBCTC, is a structured 12-week clinical program for children ages 8 to 13 who are suffering from anxiety, depression, or post-traumatic distress. It's conducted in clinical settings by psychotherapists. In the first 3 sessions in MBCTC, we provide an orientation to mindfulness. We establish the program guidelines and home practice expectations, describe the aims of the program, and we address barriers to doing the home practice. That last is also used very much in MBSR and MBCT, the adult programs, because many of us have found that while practicing mindfulness isn't difficult, remembering to practice can be very hard. These 3 sessions also focus on cultivating mindfulness of the breath and the body. Then the middle sessions deepen mindfulness with a variety of sensory-based activities that I'll describe in a moment. And then the termination sessions address the integration of mindful awareness across the senses and develop ways to continue practicing mindfulness in everyday life. For the MBCTC program, we needed to make some structural changes from the adult programs. Children often need more individual attention than adults, so typically we have even smaller groups, no more than 6 to 10 children in a group with 1 or 2 therapists. The sessions are shorter, they're 90 minutes and conducted over 12 weeks instead of the 2.5-hour sessions used in the 8-week adult programs. We also don't include the all-day practice session. And then in the treatment manual, we've added suggestions for adapting this group therapy for use in individual therapy. Now, the Mindfulness Matters program has a lot of similarities, but also a lot of differences. This program was developed primarily for K-12 teachers and therapists who want to incorporate some mindfulness techniques into their therapies without using the structured 12-week program. It's also useful for adults who work with kids and teens in non-school or non-clinical settings like community recreation centers or libraries. And parents who would like to bring mindfulness into their home may also find this program helpful. The Mindfulness Matters program is kind of like a choose-your-own-adventure book. Remember those from when we were kids? We give instructions on conducting dozens of age-appropriate activities, and these are 1 to 3 minutes in length and adaptable for different grade levels and special needs. We also offer 5 suggested pathways to address common childhood issues. These are pathways through stress and anxiety, depression, attention problems, emotion regulation, and impulsive behaviors, and trauma, abuse, and neglect. So these are suggested sequences of these 70 or 80 activities we offer that might be useful for working with these specific problems. We've also added vocabulary words, discussion questions, and tips for responding to challenges. In Mindfulness Matters, the teachers select their own activities and they can choose how to sequence them. And they can do them with a frequency that suits their own classroom. Activities can be interspersed throughout the school day or done just once a day or twice a day. There are very few home practice assignments in this program, so the parent session summaries aren't used in Mindfulness Matters. But after each mindfulness activity, we also suggest additional classroom activities that can support the main practice. And although the program can be more effective if it's used consistently throughout the school year, activities can be used on an as-needed basis. In both programs, we start by focusing on mindfulness of the breath and body. We begin with practices as short and simple as smiling while waking up or taking 3 mindful breaths. Like the adult programs, we include yoga postures and a shortened body scan. But we also practice fun movement activities like mindfully moving slowly and being a mindful mountain or being a mindful flower opening. Some of the movement activities are interactive. So for example, we can play catch with an invisible ball. One paired practice is mindfully matching another child's silly movements. So two children face to face, and one is the leader and does silly movements, and the other one matches it, mirrors it. And then we swap around so everybody gets a chance to be the leader. That one can get kind of crazy. Like the adult programs, activities are designed to cultivate an experiential understanding of how thoughts and feelings contribute to felt experiences. So experientially, children learn that thoughts capture their attention and color what they see. They also learn that strong emotions, whether they're pleasant or unpleasant, can color how they interpret events. So how well do we see when we're blinded by love or in a blind rage? Not very clearly. When we look closely, when they look closely, they may discover that their thoughts are rarely connected to what Jon Kabat-Zinn calls the nowscape. This is all of the events that are happening right in the moment, internally and externally. And in doing that, they begin to believe their own storylines a little less often. In the sensory-based sessions, we practice mindfulness of tasting, of touch, of seeing, of hearing, and mindfulness of smells. We teach children to eat a single raisin with mindful attention, draw a picture with mindful attention, or look at a picture with mindful attention, listen to music with mindful attention, and mindfully describe different objects and scents. In doing these activities, they learn about judging versus describing and deepen the understanding that buying into those storylines with judgments can contribute to their anxiety or unhappiness. Children can discover that judging is different than describing an experience, and that judging generally doesn't improve things and often makes them worse. They may find that describing their experiences rather than judging them can actually change the experience. And simply becoming more aware of our own judging thoughts can change how they relate to them. This can let us see more clearly what response choices are available in this moment. Although we can't often control another person or situation, we can always choose how to respond to it. And if you think about it, the only time any of us can make a choice is right now. We can plan to make a choice, we can think about making a choice, but anyone who's ever made an impulsive buy after considering other options recognizes that the choice was actually made in the moment. So if our attention is focused on the present moment, we might discover choices that we hadn't seen before. A Holocaust survivor, Viktor Frankl, said, "Between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is the power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom." So we teach children to discover that they do have choices. And these choice points give them opportunities to respond to events with kind speech and thoughtful behaviors. They learn that they always have the choice to act with compassion for themselves and for others. And one way that we teach kids how attention influences their experience is with simple optical illusions like these. Although images like this are familiar to most of us, a lot of kids have never seen them. So some will initially see only the duck, and others see only the rabbit. But when the other image is pointed out, they can explore the feeling of shifting their attention to change what they see. Take a moment to practice shifting your attention back and forth. Duck, rabbit, duck, rabbit. So in doing this, kids learn that simply by shifting their attention, they may see the world differently, and they may discover something new and exciting. What does the sentence say? Most read it as a bird in the hand. But when we're not paying attention, the mind can play some funny tricks on us. And the mind has a tendency to ignore what it doesn't want or doesn't expect to see. Which red dot is bigger? Most kids say the one on the left. So with this, they learn that also making judgments can be distorted by extraneous things, things that are not relevant. And these sometimes include our own thoughts and feelings. Now, how many triangles do you see? Are there 2? Are there 5? Maybe even 9? Well, in fact, there aren't any triangles at all. There are only hints of triangles. One thing the mind does when there's not enough information is connect the dots to create a complete picture. This is a survival skill. Our minds have evolved to be excellent pattern detectors. But the mind is also pretty good at creating the wrong picture. We're predisposed, we're hardwired to make connections between thoughts and ideas and actions and consequences, even without enough information. And sometimes these connect the dot pictures we create in our heads aren't accurate to reality. So that's a brief interview of the clinic and school-based mindfulness programs for kids. In both these programs, our aim is not to tell children to pay attention, but rather teach them how to pay attention. I'd like to show you a change that a few months of practicing mindfulness can bring about. In both programs, we have a drawing exercise. The first is done usually in the first session of the program, and the second is done near the end of the program. And in both instructions are exactly the same. Draw what mindfulness means to you. Now, the drawings I'm going to show you were done by a 12-year-old Latino boy from Spanish Harlem. He was a very, very smart kid, tough, growing up in a really rough environment, and was getting suspended from school on a regular basis for fighting with his classmates. Now, this is what this child drew in session 1. And you can see there's some hearts, there's something that might be a tree or a flower, but overall the sense is kind of disorganized and disconnected. It doesn't seem that there's a very clear sense in his mind at this point of what might be for him. This is what the same child drew 11 weeks later. He at the center of a heart, connected to freedom and peace and knowledge and relaxation and share and justice and forgiveness, love, and this word is attention. With the exception of attention, none of these concepts were explicitly discussed. We also saw some really remarkable changes in this young man's behaviors, including completing the rest of the school year with no more suspensions. It seems clear from these drawings that mindfulness with children can be integrating and connecting and healing. We can learn a lot from the wisdom of children. These are a few of my favorite quotes from kids in the groups I've run. Mindfulness lets me see when I'm going to get in trouble and just breathe instead. Mindfulness is not letting thoughts get in your way when you can be doing something better. And mindfulness taught me that I don't have to hit my little brother or let him make me mad. When we first began working with kids, we discovered that cultivating acceptance allows wholesome changes to emerge and grow organically. The child may experience events that arise and view her interactions with others in subtly different ways. The world may be viewed with more kindness and with a heightened sense of curiosity and wonder and delight. The child becomes more attuned to her internal world, that rich, ever-changing nowscape of thoughts and feelings and body sensations. She may discover ways to befriend those thoughts and emotions, permitting them to just come and go and not wishing them to be other than they are. Mindfulness promotes acceptance of what is, and acceptance enhances emotional resiliency and well-being. Clarity of seeing in this moment lets us see more choices, which only occur in this moment. And choices create freedom to live one's life. These are the lessons we strive to teach. And I'll close with a favorite quote from His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. He said, "If every 8-year-old in the world is taught meditation, we will eliminate violence from the world within 1 generation." Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation, Dr. Semple. I think that picture from that 12-year-old boy was so powerful. I think picture worth 1,000 words, and that just kind of sum up everything you have said. And Tzu Chi Foundation actually have our own sort of K-12 education system and our university and grad school as well. I think what you're teaching here can be very beneficial for our own students. So right now we're gonna move to the Q&A and we're gonna open up to the floor for more discussion. Thank you. So great, we're gonna start, and let me just remind our audience that you can ask the question right next to the video, and there are places where you can type in. I think as I was watching people's reaction on the chat room, people were surprised to see the picture. I see a lot of woos and wows. I think the picture is really worth 1,000 words. So here we have Freeman. Actually, this is our big boss here. That's good. Freeman asked, can we conduct this simple class through webinar or without certified mindfulness instructor? Just to calm them down, or any material we can use to learn from the skills. So I think this is important because this is the COVID-19 time. So how can we conduct this kind of training through internet? So that would be it. That's a pretty good question.
I think that the MBCTC program, with its structured group 12-session format, would be a lot more difficult to conduct by webinar. But the Mindfulness Matters program, a few of the activities require what we call props. So for example, we might have, we've got one activity where we pass a cup of water around a circle in a classroom. That would be pretty difficult to do. Or some of the paired activities, the paired movement activities. But a lot of the activities can be done one-on-one, or where each child is on a separate screen where they don't have to interact with each other necessarily, and they don't need any special props. Things like mindfully eating a raisin, well, I'm sure they would love to have their parents buy them some raisins to do that.
So in other words, we kind of have to sort of be a bit more creative and adapt to this kind of new environment.
Yeah, and I have been teaching some mindfulness programs, and things like the optical illusions, those translate well into Zoom type classes, and things that require hands-on. We have a mindful smelling practice where we have little jars with different scents in them. It can be just things from around your house, like cinnamon or chocolate or coffee. And the children practice smelling and then describing the scent, not judging it, which can be a very, very difficult practice because, number one, our sense of smell is so primitive. And then the second is that our reactions to it are almost instantaneous, with a like, dislike, the attraction or aversion, with pretty much nothing in between. So finding that moment where the judgment arises, and then finding a word to describe sense, which we don't have a huge vocabulary for, can be really challenging. But that's not a practice that would translate to a webinar. So unfortunately, we'll have to wait till we're back in person.
I understand. I do teach college students on mindfulness, and their stuff is just hard to do. You kind of have to come up different ways to work around it, which that's a challenge that we all need to sort of focus on as educators. Now we have another question: is the Mindfulness Matter program sounds very interesting? Can you share another concrete example from this program? I guess our viewers want to know a bit more details on how can they transform their kid from that, at home, based on the picture, right? How can I make my kids draw that picture?
Although the language in the Mindfulness Matters program book was primarily written for teachers, it's perfectly usable by parents at home. And because of it, that it's more of this choose your own adventure book, parents too can select different activities that they think. There's 70 or 80 activities in the book. And we've categorized them into basic breath and body practices, into mindfulness of emotions, mindfulness of thoughts, mindfulness of body. And if you look at the handout, at the end of the handout, I've actually added some information on the 12-session MBCTC program, but also the table with all of the activities listed on the Mindfulness Matters program. That table is at the back of the book, and it kind of lays out all the variety of activities. We also say at the beginning of the book that, unlike most books, we don't really need or want you to read through it from start to finish.
Well, that's good to know.
So again, there's going to be sections like the pathways. If you don't have a child who's anxious, you probably don't need to read the chapter on the pathway through anxiety, because it's basically providing information to lay people are not clinically trained, on what anxiety looks like, how it appears in the child, and then also how the parent can tell.
Very informative information for
Yeah, and
parents.
that's intended for parents and teachers, people who are not mental health professionals.
Mhm.
So if you do have a child who's anxious, that could be a very useful information. Side by side, what the child might be feeling and what the parent actually sees in the
Mm,
child.
great.
Um, so there are drawing activities, there are movement activities, almost any of them except the interactive ones that are intended for a classroom, unless you have more than one kid at home doing them, can be done at home with one child.
Ah, great, great. I think it's important to remind our audience that there are handouts on your lecture slides. So there are the tables that you have mentioned, so people can actually read it now and come up questions if you want, because I think there's a lot of information. I did look at the handout, and I noticed that we start out by sort of paying attention to ourselves, but I think later on, I think session 12 it's more about open up to other people, like the compassion aspect of it. Can you say a little bit about that?
We emphasize kindness and compassion throughout, and we've seen some really amazing examples of children um, showing empathy and compassion for another child who may be in distress in the group. All of that is spontaneous because it's not something that we explicitly focus on. Just like that child's drawing with all of the really positive qualities that he got out of it, we don't explicitly focus on those, but we see acts of kindness in the group. We see kind speech, and they come back to us each week with stories of things that have happened at home that show that there's a change in their relationships in a positive way. And the one I love is the little boy who came in and said, "You know what? I discovered I don't have to throw my phone at my little brother when I get mad." You know, for an 8-year-old, that's a pretty good insight. I don't have to do this. I don't have to let him make me mad. And so we see this in little ways throughout the program. In the last two sessions on the 12 session program, we really focus on generalizing, bringing mindfulness into everyday life. And with the home practices, we're doing that all along. We just get much more explicit. And by then, there's a remarkable bond, a cohesiveness amongst these kids that have developed. Most of them don't know each other at the beginning of the program. They often share phone numbers at the end, which we leave it totally up to them to do, remembering that that's in a clinical setting. We have a little party at the end. We usually bring the pizza, and the kids have an opportunity to interact more than we do in the first 10 groups. A lot of discussion about what they got out of the group or how they might continue the practices.
So I think self-awareness and insight is really inseparable from kindness and empathy. Those two are really very connected. It's sort of, and also I like the idea of choice points. Is that the word, right? Choice point. That remind me of the karma, the concept of karma, right? Because karma is about choice.
Yeah, and we literally use connect the dot type pictures and show how you can take a set of dots and connect them in a lot of different ways to create different pictures,
Mm-hmm.
because those are choices of how to connect the dots and how to see what's happening in this moment and how to interpret it and then how to respond to it in a kind, compassionate, mindful way.
Right, right. So we have another question here. I guess this is deal with teenagers. How do we? Because teenager, I think, is different than children. I mean, children they listen to you, and teenager they have a mind of their own. So I think when I'm listening to your talk, this remind me of like piano lessons. Like sometimes parents think this is good for the kid, but the kid is like, do I have to do this again? So how do we help a teenager to meditate or train in mindfulness?
Surprisingly, it's not hard. Um, particularly, one of the things I see is, kids these days teens are living in very, very stressful environments. They have a lot of demands on them, performance type demands academically, um, social demands. There's a cartoon about you can get enough sleep, you can have enough friends, or you can do well academically. Pick any two. And so what I've seen is a really interesting energy. When teens try this, they like it and they want more of it because it's so quickly, so readily seen how useful it can be to them. And the adult programs and our programs in the first few sessions, we really focus on how can this be helpful to you in your own life? Because this is not a quick fix. This requires discipline and practice. And nobody, adults or teens, will continue the practice if they don't feel they're getting something from it. Right? That's just human nature. And the teens will ask, what am I going to get out of this? So we actually spend time in the first few sessions talking about that. In the Mindfulness Matters program book, there's some adaptations for going up and down on the age because it's a wider age range from kindergarten to 12th grade high school. And so we'll scale up the age activities on some of these. Like we wouldn't use the duck and the rabbit picture with the 16-year-old. Right? But I've got a colleague, Marv Belzer at UCLA, who does week-long retreats with teens.
Wow.
It takes more courage than I have. And I respect him and, bow to him tremendously for that. They have a very, very high teacher-student ratio on that, about one teacher for every two teens in that. They need that really high-intensity adult presence. But he does longer, week-long retreat with 15-year-olds. And he's been very successful at it for a long time. We tend to lengthen the practices too, by the way, with teens. One basic thumb rule that we use is 1 minute of breath meditation for every year of age.
That's
with an 8-year-old, we may go up to 8 minutes. With a 15-year-old, we'll go up to 15 minutes.
So that sounds, so you've got 70 years, so it should be meditate till 70 minutes, 70 minutes plus. No, that's a nice rule of thumb. I never thought about it.
I'm up there. It's a thumb rule because it also depends on the child's development, their emotional development, and also we vary the practices. Some kids are too anxious to sit, or they have ADHD and really can't sit and focus on their breath for that long. It's perfectly okay for them to stand up and walk around quietly behind the group, as long as they're not disturbing the group. Or some may prefer standing up and leaning against the wall. Teens tend to do that a lot. They seem to feel safer with their wall at their backs. And it's okay to lean against the wall, and it's okay to keep their eyes open. And I think they get just as much benefit out of it. So we're very flexible with what each participant's needs are in the group.
So. I think this is related because I think Tzu Chi Foundation, here's another question, do have education program from K to 12, and we also have like college and grad program as well. Now, if we're really interested to sort of incorporate this kind of training into our education system, I guess the realistic question is, how much time and training should we expect from our teacher? What do you think?
We actually recommend for teachers, for the clinicians, for the MBCTC program, it's a more intensive training and does require mental health expertise. But for teachers, we actually recommend starting with either taking an MBSR program, the 8-week adult program, or Mindful Schools, which is an organization out in Oakland, has an online teacher training program. And they also are consistent with the MBSR model. So they have one 6-week basic program that basically teaches the teachers how to meditate.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have another 6-week program about how do you teach children to meditate. And so those are the two courses I actually recommend for teachers before they start doing it on their own.
So it is some time commitment. I mean, there is some minimal time commitment, because I think I'm looking at some other question. They're similar in some ways, like how much time parents should get involved. What happens if my kids are not doing it? I think that the idea is similar, right? It's you kind of have to put a lot of effort in it as a role model.
Well, modeling is certainly the way we teach mindfulness, and mindfulness is also taught through one's own experience from the foundation and grounding of our own experience. We do place a heavy emphasis on the teacher, the clinician, the parent, whoever's facilitating it, to develop their own practice. And that's also consistent with the adult MBSR and MBCT programs. So in that sense, it is a big commitment. But I've also found in the MBCTC program, we do encourage the parents to take part with their kids. There's a session handout for each of the 12 sessions that the kid takes home, and the parents can read through it and see what the homework activities are and do them with their child. And I've had quite a few parents come back to me and say, you know what, I couldn't believe that these little short activities could help me so much. And often it'll be let's call it a gateway drug into more prolonged practice
Mm.
for the adults around them, is to get a taste of it using these short 3-5 minute practices that they do with their own kids.
I think our time is almost up, but I think what you mentioned is very important, is that although your program is about children, I think from our clinical work, we know when the parents send the kids to therapy, we're not just working with kids, we're working with the whole family. It's a whole package. So really everyone should work on this kind of work.
Well, and for all the parents out there, too, nobody's surprised whatsoever. The parent that gets engaged in these programs, their child will do better.
Yeah. Surprise, surprise. Thank you so much. We're really happy to have you. You gave us some wonderful examples and wonderful tools that we can think about for our own education system, for our own children and family. Very grateful to have you here. Very happy to have you.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Peter, and please feel free to reach out if you have questions about the programs.
Great. We definitely will. Take care. So for our audience, we're very happy to have Dr. Semple here again. Our next presentation, our next speaker is, I guess we should say, a heavyweight from the mindfulness field, is a Buddhist monk, Matthew Ricard. I think many people know him. He's a Buddhist monk, a philosopher, an international best-selling author, humanitarian, and a lot of accomplishment. We're very happy to have him on November 20th, 5:30 p.m. And this will be a documentary film about his charity work. I think most people know about him through his mindfulness meditation present training, mindfulness philosophy, and mindfulness ideals. But I think less of us know about his charity organization. So the next session on Matthew Ricard, we will be focusing on his charity work and compassion in action. Thank you again, and stay tuned.